Hello and welcome to our webinar on single-use plastic bans, restrictions and penalties around the world. My name is Lisa Dean and I am the head of global compliance team at ThinkStep Compliance Limited, and I'm joined today by my colleague James Pearson, who is the EC4P product director. So in today's webinar, we will provide a brief introduction to our company, and then we'll take a quick look at the reasons why single-use plastic bans are being introduced. We'll then take a look at single-use plastic bans which have recently entered into force or have been proposed across the world. And then we'll look into the recently introduced EU Single-Use Plastics Directive. Then we'll touch on the plastic import bans and how these have led to recycled content laws. And then we'll take a brief look at any other developments in packaging regulations, such as the draft US federal packaging legislation, before explaining how we can ensure that you can achieve packaging compliance at a global level. Finally, James will provide a demonstration of EC4P before we answer any questions that you may have. So to introduce you to our company, ThinkStep is a global sustainability software company. More than 2,000 companies in 20 different industry sectors rely on ThinkStep sustainability software solutions. For example, ThinkStep provides the leading lifecycle assessment software Garby, which has 20,000 users in more than 20 different industry sectors. 40% of the global Fortune 500, such as Hewlett-Packard, Interface, Siemens, Unilever and Volkswagen, rely on ThinkStep. The EC4P platform is part of ThinkStep. Other software solutions provided by ThinkStep include our Substances Declaration Database, BombCheck, our product lifecycle software, Garby, and our enterprise sustainability solution, SOPHI. To provide you with a brief introduction of ThinkStep's industry background, we have extensive experience in WEEE, batteries, packaging, RoHS and REACH. For example, in 2003, we wrote UK government guidelines on the RoHS and WEEE directives to explain practical compliance requirements to UK companies. And in 2007, we were the first organisation to gain authorisation to operate as a UK government-approved WEEE compliance scheme, B2B WEEE scheme. So we launched our global WEEE batteries and packaging services in 2013, and we've carried out these global services for a number of clients to date. And in 2014, our web-based registration and reporting platform, EC4P, was established, which James will provide more detail on later in the webinar. So let's look into the problem with single-use plastics. Recently, you'll notice there's been much more public awareness of the problem of single-use plastics. We've all seen the distressing images of plastic pollution in the ocean, with marine life being harmed by entanglement within plastics or by ingesting plastic waste, and miles of coastline across the world being littered with washed up plastics. A report by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in partnership with the World Economic Forum estimated that the oceans will contain more plastic than fish by 2050. So we certainly have a clear picture of where we're heading. So petroleum-based plastic is not biodegradable, and large volumes often end up in landfill. The plastic that gets into water finds its way into the ocean, and when plastic degrades or breaks down, toxic chemicals are released, which can make their way into our food and water supply. These toxic chemicals are now being found in our bloodstream, and research has found them to disrupt the endocrine system, which can cause cancer, infertility, birth defects, and impaired immunity, among other issues. And with statistics such as these and growing public pressure, governments and industry are now taking action with the introduction of single-use plastics bans. So dating back to the early 2000s, countries began experimenting with different measures to reduce dependency on plastic bags, and the most common measure is to limit their free distribution through retail stores. So the figures on this slide are correct as of July 2018. As you can see, 127 countries have adopted some form of legislation regulating single-use plastic bags. 27 countries have legislation that bans or restricts other single-use plastics, such as plates, cups, straws, or packaging materials. 43 countries have included elements of extended producer responsibility for plastic bags within legislation, and 63 countries have mandates for extended producer responsibility for single-use plastics, including deposit refunds, product take-back, and recycling targets. All of the single-use plastic bans contain exceptions for certain products or materials, such as biodegradable plastics. However, biodegradable plastics are actually a point of concern, as most currently available plastics labelled as biodegradable generally only degrade under certain specific conditions, which may not always be easy to find in a natural environment. Also, some materials claiming biodegradability properties, such as oxo-degradable plastics, have found to offer no proven environmental advantage over conventional plastics, while their rapid fragmentation into microplastics are actually cause for concern. So the European Commission has started to work with the intention to restrict the use of oxoplastics in the EU. 29 countries have placed tax on single-use plastics, either as environmental tax, waste disposal fees, or a higher excise tax. The most common legal measures for single-use plastics are recycling requirements and solid waste management laws, and we'll cover a few of these measures later in the webinar. So let's take a look at recent single-use plastic bans that have been implemented or proposed. On the 29th of May of this year, the California Senate passed the California Circular Economy and Plastic Pollution Reduction Act. The Department of Resources, Recycling and Recovery, or CalRecycle, would be required to adopt regulations by the 1st of January 2023 if the bills pass the final vote. So priority single-use products and packaging are to be source reduced and to reusable packaging and products to the greatest extent feasible. The Act would require manufacturers and retailers in the state to achieve a 75% reduction of the waste generated from single-use packaging and products by 2030. This target is to be met through source reduction, recycling, or composting. And the bill would also require manufacturers and retailers to annually report specified information to the department. New versions of the bills could actually be unveiled in the coming days to reflect ongoing talks with industry and environmental groups. Industry groups have expressed concerns over what they see as unrealistic targets. So what is a priority single-use product? Well, this will be determined by the department based on litter surveys conducted in California between 2017 and 2020. The 10 single-use plastic products that are the most littered in California will be considered as the priority single-use plastic products. In the Philippines, 2 single-use plastic acts have been proposed on the 19th of July of this year. The first act was filed by Senator Francis Pangilinan. It proposes to ban the use of all single-use plastics 1 year after the measure comes into force. And single-use plastics are defined as disposable plastics, which are commonly used for packaging and items intended to be used only once before they're thrown away or recycled. There will be incentives for those who reuse and recycle, and a levy would be charged for each piece of single-use plastic that's already in circulation. And the importation of single-use plastics would be prohibited 1 year from when the law comes into force. The second act was filed by Senator Cynthia Villa. It proposes to regulate the manufacturing, importation and use of single-use plastic products. And single-use plastics would be banned from issue by food establishments, stores, markets and retailers. Varying ranges of penalties for violations would be applied to business enterprises, stores and manufacturers, including potential suspension or cancellation of business permits. A fund would be created from collective tariffs, levies and fees, which would be used for the establishment of recycling centres and community-based initiatives. So in Canada, currently a very small amount of plastic used is actually recycled, only 10%. So on the 10th of June this year, the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, announced that Canada will ban single-use plastics as early as 2021. The scope of plastics covered by the ban will be determined by a science-based review, and the Canadian government is also drawing inspiration from the EU Single-Use Plastic ban, which we'll cover in a couple of slides' time. Prime Minister Narendra Modi wants to ban single-use plastics in India by 2022. The Prime Minister is set to launch a campaign with a ban on plastic bags, cups, plates, small bottles, straws, and certain types of sachets on the 2nd of October. So this news was announced by officials who have asked not to be identified, but the officials indicated that the ban will cover manufacturing, usage, and import of such items, and penalties are likely to take effect 6 months after the ban has been introduced. And under the ban, e-commerce companies will be required to cut back on plastic packaging that makes up 40% of India's annual packaging consumption. On the 4th of September, Amazon India and Walmart's Flipkart, two of the largest e-commerce businesses in India, pledged to curb the usage of single-use plastic in their packaging in this country. So just to give a few examples of penalties that companies can face who violate the single-use plastic laws. Kenya has fines of up to $38,000 and a jail term of up to 4 years for the violation of its single-use plastic bag ban. In India, the rules prohibit the use of disposable plastic items such as bags, cutlery, cups, and bottles under a certain size. And the fines for violation of this law are $69 for the first offence and up to $346 or 3 months in jail for repeat offenders. And in New Zealand, when the Waste Minimisation Regulations 2018 came into force on the 1st of July 2019, retailers were given 6 months to phase out single-use plastic shopping bags or face fines of up to $67,000. So to look at the EU Single-Use Plastics Directive. In a strategy report for plastics in a circular economy developed by the European Commission, it is stated that around 25.8 million tonnes of plastic waste are generated in Europe every year, and less than 30% of this waste is collected for recycling. Of this amount, a significant share leaves the EU to be treated in third countries. And this chart from the report shows that 59% of the plastic waste generated in the EU in 2015 came from packaging. So on the 21st of May this year, the EU adopted measures to tackle marine litter coming from the 10 single-use plastic products most often found on European beaches, as well as abandoned fishing gear and oxo-degradable plastics. The rules are part of the EU plastic strategy, which aims to have all plastic packaging placed on the EU market as reusable or recyclable by 2030. By 2021, there will be a ban on selected single-use products made of plastic for which alternatives exist on the market. The directive also introduces measures to reduce consumption of food containers and beverage cups made of plastic and specific marking and labelling of certain products. Extended producer responsibility schemes will be introduced for products such as tobacco filters and fishing gear to cover the cost to clean up this litter. And there will be a 90% collection target for plastic bottles by 2029, as well as a design requirement to connect caps to bottles. A target has been set to incorporate 25% of recycled plastic in PET bottles from 2025 and 30% in all plastic bottles from 2030. And financial measures are already being introduced, which encourage manufacturers to use plastic packaging, which is easier to recycle at end of use. The EU Single-Use Plastics Directive came into force in August 2019, and member states shall bring it into force with local regulations and administrative provisions necessary to comply with the directive by the 3rd of July 2021. The design requirement to connect caps to bottles will apply to beverage containers up to 3 litres 5 years after the directive comes into force, and all additional EPR obligations specified under the directive will need to be implemented between January 2023 and December 2024, depending on the product. The European Strategy for Plastics in a Circular Economy, adopted in January 2018, aims to transform the way plastic products are designed, used, produced and recycled in the EU. So a better design of plastic products, higher plastic waste recycling rates, better quality recyclates will help boost the market for recycled plastics. In line with the objectives of the European Circular Economy Policy and revised Waste Framework Directive, we're now seeing more member states introduce modulated fees for packaging placed on their country markets. So reduced fees are offered on packaging which has a high level of recycled content or contains easily recycled materials. An amendment to the decree on approval of household packaging compliance organisations in France revises the specifications for household packaging compliance organisations. So from the 1st of January 2019, the only household packaging recovery organisation operating in France must charge a 50% lower recycling fee for packaging materials which comprise of at least 50% recycled material content. The recycled material used may be derived from household, industrial or commercial packaging, and packaging recycling fees will be lowered by increasing the fees for plastics. A note on France's ban on single-use plastics, which was introduced on the 30th of October 2018. The ban currently applies to plastic drinking straws, stirrers, plastic cutlery, steak sticks, disposable cups, meal trays, ice cream jars, salad bowls, and beverage mixing cans from January 2020. However, on the 21st of July of this year, the French government submitted a draft amendment to the European Commission, which proposes to initially restrict the scope of the ban to products that actually don't fall under the definition of packaging. So This is plastic cups, plates and cutlery which are sold empty. The amendment would extend the ban from the 3rd of July 2021 to single-use plastic products that do fall under the definition of packaging, so plastic cups filled at the point of sale and ready to eat food containers. And comments on the amendment are open until the 21st of October. Under the new German packaging law, lower recycling fees must be charged for packaging that is more easily recycled and that contains recycled material or renewable raw materials. So, for example, plastic packaging, which contains recyclates, will attract a lower recycling fee. Recovery organisations in Germany were required to notify the Environment Agency by the 1st of June this year on how they will set recycling fees that provide incentives to use packaging materials that reach the highest possible recycling rates. On the 1st of April of this year, the Swedish Packaging Recovery Scheme, FTI, adjusted its fees so that plastic packaging that is easy to recycle will cost less to place on the market than packaging that is more difficult to recycle. FTI have also published a useful guidance document which will help companies decide which plastic packaging materials to use based on their environmental impacts. And the fee structure for paper-based packaging is also currently under review. China's ban on imports of low-grade plastic waste has driven the development for sustainable plastic handling. In April 2018, the Swedish EPA allocated €75,000 to establish an ISO secretariat for the development of standards on plastic recycling. The EPA blames the lack of plastics recycling standards in the EU and globally for the limited demand for recycled plastics. Many manufacturers refuse to use recycled plastics because of uncertainty about its quality. And recycling standards would increase demand for recycled plastics while preventing the spread of harmful plastic additives. So figures for 2017, comparable to 2010, show that plastic use in Sweden has increased by 300,000 tonnes per year. And the Swedish Minister for the Environment has said that Sweden's government wants to look at a ban on plastic cups and food containers, which goes a step further than the EU directive on single-use plastics. So how are plastic export bans having an effect on legislation? Countries such as China, Thailand, Malaysia and India have recently restricted plastic and other waste being imported, and this has resulted in the exporting countries struggling to handle high volumes of waste. In May of this year, at the conference of the parties to the Basel Convention, 186 countries agreed to place new restrictions to control plastic waste exporting. Under the new decision, global exports of plastic waste that are not perfectly sorted, recyclable and uncontaminated will be subject to prior consent from exporting and importing countries as of the 1st of January 2021. And this decision means that exporters of plastic waste will be required to obtain permission from the country receiving the contaminated, mixed or unrecyclable plastics, a process known as prior informed consent. As we've seen in the previous slides, countries are already implementing modulated fees, which favour easily recyclable materials or products containing a high level of recycled content. Exporting countries are looking to meet the standards set by the Basel Convention through implementing recycled content laws, whereby the level of plastic waste would be of a higher purity, and the exporting market can meet the restrictions set by importers. So the aim of recycled content laws is to have a more circular approach to plastics by ensuring the material is a good enough standard to be reused rather than wasted, and keeping a high level of recycled content. So by adopting this approach to plastics, it allows for the continuing movement of plastic through markets and helps revive the export market. To take a look at other plastics and packaging regulation developments. On the 15th of August this year, Ontario announced that operating costs of its Blue Box programme will be funded by the producers of products and packaging under newly adopted extended producer responsibility legislation. So over the next year, Ontario will develop and consult on regulations to support the new producer responsibility framework for the Blue Box programme. From the 1st of January 2023, the first group of municipalities will transfer responsibility of their programmes to producers. And by the end of December 2025, producers will be fully responsible for providing Blue Box services province-wide. In the USA, on the 19th of July this year, draft federal legislation was released to hold producers and consumers responsible for single-use plastics and packaging waste that they produce. A federal bill is set to be introduced later this year. The draft proposal includes extended producer responsibility for packaging, a nationwide container deposit requirement, a ban on certain single-use plastic products, a carrier bag fee, and standardised labelling for recycling and disposal. By shifting the financial burden of cleaning up plastic pollution from the state and local governments to companies that manufacture and sell the products, the bill will increase effectiveness of pollution control. Producers will be required to design, manage, and finance programs for end-of-life management of their products and packaging as a condition of sale. And the industry will also be given incentives to develop less polluting alternatives for these products. Deposits will be placed on beverage containers, and a carry-out bag fee will be placed on paper bags and non-reusable bags. And there will also be a ban on the use of expanded polystyrene in foodware. Where alternatives are available and affordable, the most commonly polluted single-use plastic products will be banned from the market in the near future. The ban will apply to lightweight plastic carry-out bags, cups and lids, cotton buds, cutlery, plates, straws, snack packaging and drink stirrers, which will have to be made exclusively from reusable or more sustainable materials. Consumer products made from plastic will need to be labelled on how waste should be disposed of and indicate the presence of plastics in the product. And targets will be set for states to collect a high percentage of single-use plastic drink bottles and to standardise recycling collection. The new Plastics Economy Global Commitment is a voluntary agreement initiated by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and signed by plastic packaging stakeholders ranging from retailers to governments. Launched in October 2018, the commitment established a vision to stop plastic waste and pollution at source by applying circular economy principles. The commitment has been signed by over 290 organisations, including 71 packaging goods manufacturers and retailers, representing 20% of all plastic packaging produced globally. Signatories commit to the 6 goals of a common vision listed here. Under the commitment, packaged goods companies and retailers have committed to take action to eliminate problematic or unnecessary packaging by 2025, move from single-use towards reuse models where relevant by 2025, make 100% of packaging, plastic packaging reusable, recyclable or compostable by 2025, and set an ambitious 2025 recycled content targets across all plastic packaging used. And currently 40 brands and retailers are piloting or expanding reuse and refill schemes. So the first Global Commitment Report reveals details of industry and government efforts to tackle plastic waste and pollution, details of how brands, governments and other organisations are tackling plastic pollution have been set out side by side for the first time, thanks to a new report published by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's New Plastic Economy Initiative in collaboration with the UN Environment. And major companies, including Colgate-Palmolive, Mars, Nestle, SC Johnson and the Coca-Cola Company, are publicly disclosing their annual plastic packaging volumes, which marks an important step towards greater transparency in today's plastic system. Right, so now I'm going to hand you over to James, our EC4P product manager, who can provide some information about our compliance consultancy and software services, which we've been providing to companies for around 15 years at an EU level and for over 6 years at a global level. And James will also be able to give you a demonstration of EC4P's web-based registration and reporting platform.